The night came faster than Clara expected, like a shadow rolling over her life. She had drawn the curtains, locked the doors, and checked every window twice. But no matter what she did, she couldn't stop glancing toward the driveway. The bus sat in the dark like a sleeping giant, its metallic frame reflecting the faint orange glow of the streetlight. It looked harmless, silent, ordinary. Yet Clara knew better. That old bus was no longer just a project. It was a secret, a buried truth sitting 20 feet from her house. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those gemstones, the way they had caught the light, the way they had breathed. It wasn't greed that haunted her. It was fear. Who had put them there, and who had been watching her? She tried to eat, but every bite turned to dust in her mouth. Ethan noticed her unease. "You okay, Mom?" She forced a smile, "Just tired." He nodded but didn't look convinced. "You've been acting weird lately. It's that bus, isn't it? I swear you care more about that thing than you do about." "Ethan," her voice cut through his words sharper than she meant. "Not tonight, please." He stopped. The silence between them was heavy, brittle. After a moment, he muttered a soft "sorry" and disappeared down the hall. When she finally heard his bedroom door click shut, Clara rose from her chair and stood by the window again. The glass was cold under her fingertips as she peered through the curtains. The street was empty. The dark sedan hadn't returned, but still, something in her gut twisted. It felt like the calm before something she couldn't yet name. She turned away from the window, pacing the living room in silence. Her thoughts raced faster than she could breathe. Those gems, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, they didn't just appear there. Someone hid them with purpose. Someone who never meant for them to be found. And then there was the engraving. The coordinates burned into her mind. 32 degrees N, 106 degrees W. She sat down at the kitchen table, flipping open her laptop. The glow of the screen lit her face as she typed the numbers into the search bar. A map appeared, southern New Mexico, near White Sands. Her brow furrowed. "Why there?" she whispered. "White Sands, the place where silence stretches for miles, where the earth itself looks like bone." What could connect a vanished jeweler from the 1960s to a desert in New Mexico? Before she could think further, a sound from outside broke her concentration. A faint metallic tap. Her head snapped up. The bus. The sound came again, low, deliberate, from the very same spot she'd opened that morning. Without thinking, Clara grabbed a flashlight and her jacket, heart pounding. The night air slapped her skin as she stepped outside. The bus loomed ahead of her in the dark, the silver-gray body glowing faintly under the streetlight. She hesitated by the door, her breath fogging in the cold. "Please," she whispered to herself, "please just be the wind." She climbed the steps, her flashlight slicing through the darkness. The air inside was colder than the night outside. A chill seeped into her bones as she scanned the cabin. Nothing moved, nothing spoke, only silence, and then another tap from above. Her flashlight trembled as she raised it toward the ceiling. The panel was slightly ajar. Her pulse raced so hard she could hear it echoing in her ears. She knew she'd closed it tightly that morning. There was no way it could have shifted on its own. She stepped closer. The light caught on something, a tiny glint along the edge of the open panel, metal scraping against metal. Clara swallowed hard. "Who's there?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but the sound of it made the emptiness feel larger. No response, only the faint hiss of her own breath. She took another cautious step, the old floor groaning under her weight. The beam of her flashlight drifted upward again, and that's when she saw it. An envelope wedged between the velvet pouches near the edge of the compartment. It hadn't been there before. Her stomach dropped. She climbed onto the stool, every instinct screaming at her to stop, to leave it alone. But curiosity, raw, aching curiosity, drowned out fear. She reached up and tugged the envelope free. Dust flaked off in tiny clouds as she turned it over in her hand. The paper was yellowed, brittle, sealed with a wax emblem that had cracked with age. The symbol, a small crown above two crossed keys, meant nothing to her. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a folded letter, written in ink that had faded to brown. She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, the strokes uneven as if written under duress. "If you've found this, I pray you are not the one I feared would come. The stones are not what they seem. Protect them. Protect yourself. I cannot undo what I've done. No signature. Just two initials at the bottom. R.H. Clara's breath hitched. Her mind reeled. The jeweler, Ronald Hale. She clutched the letter to her chest, heart thundering. His words rang in her ears like an echo she couldn't silence. Not what they seem. The flashlight dimmed, its battery giving out. In the flickering half-light, the bus seemed to breathe, shadows shifting, dust swirling in slow motion. For a moment, she thought she heard something behind her, a faint creak of footsteps on the metal floor. She spun around, but there was no one there. Still, she could feel it, the weight of presence, the sense that she was no longer alone in that bus. She backed toward the door, clutching the letter. "You're losing it," she whispered, trying to steady her shaking voice. "It's just an old story, that's all." But even as she said it, the last words of the letter burned through her mind like a whisper carried by the cold wind. "Protect them. Protect yourself." Clara stepped outside, the night air washing over her like a wave. She turned back one last time. The bus stood silent again, motionless, but she knew better now. It wasn't just holding history. It was guarding something alive, something that didn't want to be disturbed. She locked the door, slid the letter into her coat pocket, and walked back to the house, each step slower than the last. Inside, she leaned against the door and closed her eyes, breathing hard. Outside, unseen in the dark, a pair of headlights flared briefly down the street. The same black sedan paused for a heartbeat, then rolled away into the night. Clara didn't see it. She only heard the faint sound of the wind pressing against the windows, and the whisper that followed her into sleep. "You've opened what should have stayed closed." As dawn crept over the horizon, the bus glowed faintly in the early light, its secrets no longer sleeping, its silence no longer kind. Morning broke cold and colorless, the kind of morning that felt like it hadn't quite decided to arrive. Clara hadn't slept. The letter lay unfolded on the kitchen table beside her untouched coffee, its edges curled slightly from where her trembling fingers had held it through the night. The words were burned into her mind. "The stones are not what they seem. Protect them. Protect yourself." She couldn't stop reading it, as though the ink itself whispered each time her eyes passed over it. She wanted to believe it was paranoia, that the letter was just an echo from some desperate man long dead. But deep down she knew better. At 9:00 a.m., a knock at the door made her flinch so hard the mug nearly toppled. 3 knocks, slow, measured. Her heart hammered as she crossed the room. She glanced through the curtain and froze. A man stood on her porch, early 50s maybe, neatly dressed in a tan overcoat and dark gloves. His shoes were polished, his posture rigid. He looked like he belonged to some forgotten time out of place in the quiet suburban street. When she opened the door just a crack, he smiled. A calm, professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. "I'm with the National Vehicle Registry. We're conducting a follow-up on a recent auction purchase, a 1955 Silver Starline model. That was you, correct?" Clara's throat tightened. "Yes," she said cautiously. "Why?" He pulled out a slim leather folder and opened it to reveal a badge, official looking, though she couldn't make out the details. Just routine verification. He said, "That bus was originally registered under a private company that dissolved in 1962. Sometimes there are ownership disputes. Do you mind if I take a quick look? Purely procedural." Her pulse thudded in her ears. Ownership disputes, the words felt too carefully chosen. She forced a polite smile. "Now's not a good time. The bus isn't in drivable condition." "That's all right," he said easily. "I only need to confirm the VIN number, make sure it matches the original records." His eyes shifted briefly toward the driveway. The look was quick, precise, calculated. Something inside her screamed no. "I'll call the auction office," she said, her tone sharper now. "If there's a mix-up, they can reach me." For the first time, his smile faltered. Not much, but enough to reveal the tension beneath his mask, of course. He said smoothly, "No need to worry. I'll come back later." He handed her a card. She didn't look at it until he was gone. It was blank. No number, no title, just a plain white rectangle. Clara closed the door and locked it, her hands shaking. She walked back to the kitchen, forcing herself to breathe. Outside, she could hear the faint hum of an engine starting. The same black sedan from before rolling slowly down the street. She turned the card over again. Nothing. A minute later, she crumpled it and threw it in the trash. That afternoon, she went back to the bus. The letters still burned in her coat pocket, the man's voice echoing in her head. Ownership disputes. The air inside the bus felt thicker now. The once sweet scent of old velvet had soured, mingling with the metallic tang of fear. She climbed inside and knelt beneath the ceiling panel again, running her hand along the edges. It was closed tight, just as she'd left it, but now it seemed heavier, as if aware of the danger pressing in. She whispered, "What were you running from, Hale?" No answer came, only the groan of metal under her weight. In one of the overhead compartments, she found an old ledger bound in cracked leather. It must have fallen when she opened the ceiling yesterday. She hadn't noticed it in the rush. Her pulse spiked as she lifted it. The pages inside were yellowed but intact, filled with neat, looping handwriting. She sat on one of the seats, flipping through. June 10, 1961, Valparaiso shipment secured. June 12, transfer complete. Santiago next. June 14, all accounted for. No witnesses. They cannot trace it. She stopped reading. Her hands began to tremble. At the bottom of the final page, one last entry stood alone, circled in red ink. June 17, 1961, Santiago shipment missing. Her breath caught. The handwriting changed slightly, the strokes shakier. Below the circled words was a single note, smaller, rush. Almost a plea, they know. "If I don't make it, the bus carries more than metal and stone." Clara's heartbeat roared in her ears. The air in the bus seemed to close in on her. She clutched the ledger to her chest, her eyes darting toward the window. The street was empty. The only sound was the wind scraping dry leaves across the pavement. She whispered, "What did you do, Ronald?" That night, she sat by the dim glow of her desk lamp, the ledger open beside her, the letter beside it. The two together felt like pieces of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. The stones are not what they seem. They cannot trace it. Missing. She ran her fingers through her hair, exhaustion weighing her down. The gems weren't just valuables. They were evidence, evidence of something big, something people were still willing to kill for. A low rumble broke through the silence. A car engine. Her blood ran cold. She turned off the lamp and crept toward the window. Outside, under the streetlight, the same black sedan had returned. It sat there idling, headlights off. Clara stepped back, her breath caught in her throat. The ledger lay open on the desk, the words staring back like ghosts. For a moment, she thought she saw a silhouette move inside the car, a man, sitting perfectly still, watching. The engine revved once, then the car rolled slowly away, fading into the distance. She stayed there for a long time, her body rigid, her hands clutching the desk for balance. When she finally moved, she turned the ledger's last page one more time. The ink there shimmered faintly, catching the light, something she hadn't noticed before. Tiny specks of red dust had gathered in the crease of the page. Not ink, not rust, something finer, ruby dust. Her heart skipped a beat. Whatever Ronald Hale had hidden, it wasn't just treasure. It was a message written in gemstones, a warning carried across decades. And Clara Mitchell had just stepped into the center of it. Outside, the wind began to rise again, brushing against the bus like fingertips on glass. And for the first time, Clara understood. The past wasn't buried. It was circling her, waiting for her to turn the page. The next morning arrived washed in pale gold, but the warmth never reached inside. Clara sat at the table staring at the ledger, its cracked spine open to the last haunting entry. The words seemed to move under her gaze, pulsing with meaning. They know, if I don't make it, the bus carries more than metal and stone. She whispered the words under her breath over and over, until they stopped sounding like words at all. Ethan entered, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, did you even sleep?" Clara forced a small smile. "Yeah, a little." He looked at the papers spread out before her. "You working on the bus again, in a way," she said quietly, closing the ledger before he could see. "Eat something before you're late." He shrugged, grabbed a banana, and left without another word. As the door clicked shut behind him, silence filled the house again, thick and uneasy. Clara exhaled shakily. Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch. The sedan hadn't come back that night, but the image of it, the dark windows, the idling engine, had rooted itself in her mind. Someone knew what she had found. Someone had been waiting for that ceiling to open, and now it had. She picked up the ledger and the old letter and tucked them both into her coat pocket. If she was being watched, she couldn't afford to keep them in the house. Outside, the morning air was crisp and dry. She locked the front door, glancing once toward the curb. Nothing. Only the slow hum of distant traffic and the cry of a lone crow overhead. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her back. She walked to the bus, the sound of her boots crunching against the gravel cutting through the stillness. The bus loomed quiet, its faded metal gleaming faintly under the early sun. Inside, the air was colder than usual. The faint scent of oil and dust hung like a ghost in the space. She moved to the driver's seat, sat down, and laid the ledger on her lap. Her fingers brushed across the pages again. Names, locations, amounts, signatures. Then, halfway through, she noticed something she'd missed before. A page torn out. The ragged edge looked fresh compared to the rest of the paper. The fibers hadn't yellowed like the others. It was torn recently. Her stomach turned. Someone else had already been through this ledger before she found it. She flipped to the next page. A faint indentation marked the paper beneath, the ghost of a sentence written on the missing sheet. She angled it toward the light. Slowly, like developing film, the outline revealed itself. If they find the Santiago manifest, burn it. She exhaled shakily. Manifest. She whispered, "There's another record somewhere. Maybe still inside the bus." She began searching. Seat cushions, floor compartments, even under the driver's pedals. Nothing. Her mind raced through possibilities. If Hale had been hiding gems and a ledger, the manifest could be anywhere. Tucked behind the panels, under the floorboards, or... Her eyes drifted to the narrow strip of metal that ran along the wall under the windows. The paneling looked newer than the rest, like it had been replaced. She crouched beside it, running her fingers along the seam. A faint vibration hummed beneath her touch. It wasn't metal on metal, it was hollow, heart-pounding. She found her screwdriver and pried at the edge. The panel resisted, then lifted slightly with a sigh of dust. Behind it, another compartment, smaller this time. Inside lay a thin leather folder sealed with twine. She pulled it out gently, the leather dry and brittle against her skin. When she untied it, several pages of onions, skin paper, unfolded in her hands, each filled with numbers, signatures, and destinations. The top line read, Santiago Manifest, June 1961. Her pulse quickened as she read on. Cargo codes, shipment weights, and one cryptic entry at the bottom, 40, 2 stones red, blue, green transferred to bus no. 217 per private order, authorization, R. Hale. Bus no. 217, her bus. She sank into the nearest seat, her fingers gripping the paper. The realization hit her hard. This wasn't a simple smuggling operation. The gems weren't just stolen, they had been moved under government authorization. She whispered, "Oh God." "What did you do, Hale?" A sound outside made her freeze, gravel crunching, slow, deliberate. Clara's eyes darted toward the window. A figure walked up her driveway. A different man this time. Younger, dark suit, sunglasses despite the morning light. He didn't knock. He just looked at the bus. Her breath hitched. He raised a camera, took a single photo, then turned and walked away without a word. Clara waited until he was gone before exhaling, the sound breaking through the silence like glass shattering. She gathered the manifest, the ledger, and the letter, clutching them to her chest. Her instincts screamed the same truth. This was no longer about history. It was about survival. Hours passed before she could think straight again. The documents lay spread across her kitchen table, forming a chaotic map of mystery and guilt. The letter warned her to protect the stones. The ledger spoke of fear and secrecy. And now the manifest connected everything to something much bigger. Something official, something dangerous. She poured herself a glass of water and sat down, staring at the evidence. It wasn't just one man's secret, it was a network, and if the gems had been worth killing for in 1961, what would they be worth now? Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the quiet. A number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello," silence, then Mrs. Mitchell. The voice was male, calm, too calm. Her stomach turned to ice. "Who is this? You spoke with my colleague earlier." The man said smoothly, "About the Silver Star Line bus." Clara gripped the phone tighter. "I told him I'm not interested." The pause on the line was long enough to make her skin crawl. "I'm afraid it's not optional," the voice replied. "We'll be in touch." The line went dead. Clara lowered the phone slowly, her hands shaking. The quiet of the house suddenly felt hostile. Through the window she could see the bus again, the same old shell, now gleaming faintly under the grey sky. It looked back at her like an accomplice keeping terrible secrets. She stepped closer to the glass, whispering to herself, "What have I done?" But deep down she knew. She had opened something far larger than she understood. And as the clouds gathered over the silent street, the first drops of rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, like the sky itself trying to wash away what she had uncovered. Somewhere in the distance, the low hum of an engine began again. As the storm rolled in, Clara stood frozen by the window, watching the past come alive in the rain. The bus stood unmoving, but inside its hollow frame, something had begun to shift once more. Something that would not stay hidden for long. The rain didn't stop for 2 days. It came in long, slanting waves that turned the streets into rivers and left the bus glistening beneath a gray sky. Every droplet that struck its metal roof sounded like a heartbeat. Clara sat by the window, watching the water slide down the glass, her reflection ghosting over the storm outside. In her hands, the letter and ledger felt heavier than they ever had, two relics that refused to let her rest. She'd read every line a dozen times. Each word led to more questions, each silence between the ink whispering louder than the sentences themselves. Santiago, the name threaded through everything, the manifest, the letter, the coordinates. It was time to know what it meant. Ethan's voice broke her thoughts. "You've been on that thing for hours, Mom. What are you even looking for?" She glanced up, forcing calm into her tone. "History. I'm trying to figure out where the bus came from." He leaned against the counter, frowning. "History doesn't sit outside watching you at night." Her chest tightened. "What do you mean, that car, the black one? It was here again last night." Clara froze. "You saw it?" He nodded. "Yeah, it parked across the street around 2 in the morning. I thought maybe you were talking to someone, but it just sat there, headlights off." She stared at him, words caught in her throat. Did you get a plate number?" "No." His voice dropped. "But I didn't sleep after that." Clara forced herself to steady her breath. "It's fine, sweetheart. Probably just someone lost." He gave her a look that said he didn't believe her. "You always say that." When he left for school, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, like the air itself was waiting. Clara sat there a long while before finally reaching for her laptop. She typed Ronald Hale into the search bar, expecting nothing. But the results appeared almost instantly, one headline pulling her gaze like a magnet. "Renowned jeweler Ronald Hale vanishes, authorities, suspect political ties to 1961, Chilean coup funding." Her eyes widened. The article was dated decades ago, the text grainy, the images faded. A photograph showed a young man in a crisp suit, smiling beside a display case filled with glittering stones. His eyes held charm, ambition, and something unreadable. The article described Hale as a jewel trader turned smuggler, accused of funneling money and gems to rebel forces in South America. The Santiago shipment was rumored to have contained bloodstones, precious gems mined through forced labor and political violence. When Hale vanished, investigators claimed he had stolen them for himself, vanishing into the desert somewhere between Texas and New Mexico. Clara leaned back, her pulse pounding. Bloodstones. The word itself carried weight. The kind of wealth that destroyed lives long before it bought them. She whispered, "You weren't running from greed, were you, Ronald?" Her phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. "You're digging too deep." Her hand went cold. She dropped the phone onto the counter, staring at the words as if they might vanish if she didn't breathe. Outside, thunder rumbled. She stood, pacing, trying to think. The letter, the gems, the ledger, all of it painted a story that didn't belong to her, yet now had her trapped inside it. Someone knew what she'd found, and they wanted it back. She moved to the bus, umbrella forgotten in the rain. The downpour soaked her hair and jacket, but she didn't care. She climbed inside, closing the door behind her, breath shallow. The bus smelled of damp velvet and old fear. She sat in the driver's seat, tracing her fingers across the brass plate against Santiago Route, 1961. Her thumb brushed the engraving, and a memory not her own seemed to bloom behind her eyes. A flash of men in uniforms, the sound of engines roaring in a foreign port, a voice shouting in Spanish, words she didn't understand but somehow felt. She gasped, gripping the wheel until her knuckles turned white. The vision faded as quickly as it came, leaving her shaking. Rain pounded harder against the roof, drumming out a warning. She turned to the compartment above her head. It was still closed, but the weight of what lay inside seemed to pull the air tight around her. Those stones weren't just treasure, they were blood, bound, stolen from people who'd suffered for them. Clara closed her eyes. "What am I supposed to do with you?" she whispered. The bus gave no answer, only the steady sound of rain. When she finally stood, she noticed something new. Muddy footprints across the floor of the bus. Too large to be hers, too fresh to have dried. Her breath caught. She backed away slowly, eyes wide. Someone had been inside. She turned toward the door, but before she could reach it, she noticed something else on the dashboard. A business card. The same blank white card the man had handed her before. Only this time it wasn't blank. A message was scrawled across it in neat, mechanical handwriting. "We need to talk tonight." No name, no address, just a single line beneath it. "We already know where you keep them." Clara's chest constricted. She tore the card in half and let it fall to the wet floor, her hands trembling. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to pack up, grab Ethan, and disappear before whoever "we" was made their move. But another voice whispered beneath the panic, quiet and unyielding. "If you run, you'll never stop running." She looked around the bus one more time, the gems above her, the letter in her pocket, the ledger on the seat. This was no longer just about her. It was about truth, and about the man who had died trying to protect it. Rain beat against the glass, streaking the windows like tears. Clara exhaled slowly, gripping the driver's wheel one last time. "If this is what you died for, Hale," she said softly, "I'm going to finish it." Lightning flashed outside, and for a split second, her reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger's, stronger, colder, and ready to face the storm. As thunder rolled over the empty street, Clara knew the ghosts of Santiago had finally found her, and they weren't done speaking. The storm raged through the night, the kind that made the whole world feel smaller. Rain hammered against the windows, thunder rolling in endless waves, yet inside the house, it was the silence between those rumbles that terrified Clara most. The bus loomed beyond the window, faintly visible under the streetlight's flicker, its curved body gleaming like something half alive. Every time the thunder cracked, she imagined the hidden gems inside vibrating in the ceiling, pulsing with light no one could see. She sat in the dark, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, staring at the torn business card on the table. The words still echoed in her mind, "We already know where you keep them." It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. She reached for her phone, scrolling through contacts she hadn't used in months. There was no one to call, no one she could trust enough to believe this story. She'd built her life back from silence after the divorce, and now that silence had turned into a trap. At 11:46 p.m., she heard it, a car engine, slow, crawling down the street. Her pulse jumped. She peered through the curtain, heart hammering. The black sedan glided past her house, headlights off. It didn't stop this time. But she knew it would be back. Clara stepped away from the window, pressing a shaking hand to her chest. Every instinct screamed to hide the gems, to bury the truth. But she couldn't, not yet, not until she understood what she was holding and who she was up against. She grabbed her coat, slipped the ledger and the letter into her bag, and stepped into the storm. The rain drenched her instantly, cold and relentless. She didn't bother with an umbrella. She just walked straight to the bus, her boots splashing through puddles. The wind howled like the sea, and lightning painted the world white for a heartbeat at a time. She pulled the door open and climbed inside. The air was damp, the smell of wet velvet thick around her. The bus felt different tonight, darker, smaller. The shadows seemed to lean closer as if listening. She moved to the back, her flashlight sweeping across the walls. The footprints she'd found earlier were gone now, wiped clean by someone else's careful hands. That terrified her more than if they'd still been there. She whispered, "What do you want from me?" The only answer was the rain beating against the roof. She sat down in the same seat where she'd first opened the ceiling, her reflection faintly visible in the dark glass. She pulled out the ledger, flipping through the pages once more, hoping to find something she'd missed. Halfway through, a loose page fluttered free, a torn scrap that had been hidden deep within the binding. She hadn't seen it before. Her trembling fingers unfolded it. This page wasn't written by Ronald Hale. The handwriting was harsher, the ink faded almost to gray. At the top, a date, June 15, 1961. Below it, only a few lines. The shipment reached Santiago. Hale refused payment. He said the stones weren't ours to sell. He's gone. If you find this, burn everything. Clara's stomach twisted. Hale hadn't stolen the gems for greed. He'd stolen them to stop something. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "You tried to protect them." She turned the page over. On the back was a name, Coronel Vargas, and beneath it, a code written in numbers. 32 degrees N, 106 degrees W. The same coordinates from the brass plate on the bus. Clara's flashlight dimmed again, and for a split second, the cabin went dark. When the beam returned, she nearly screamed. A shape stood at the front of the bus, tall, motionless. Her pulse roared in her ears. The light flickered, and the shape dissolved into shadow. The empty driver's seat, nothing more. She exhaled a shaky breath, pressing a hand over her mouth to quiet herself. "You're imagining things," she whispered, though her body didn't believe it. But then she heard it, a faint thump from above, not the ceiling, deeper from within it. Her flashlight shook as she aimed it upward. Dust sifted down from the edges of the ceiling panel, and a sound followed. A soft rattle, like metal shifting against metal. Clara's breath hitched. The panel began to lift, only an inch, then two. She stumbled backward, the light jerking wildly. The opening widened just enough for something to fall through, a small velvet pouch hitting the floor with a muted thud. Her heartbeat thundered as she crouched, reaching for it. The pouch was soaked, its drawstrings frayed. She opened it slowly, praying it would be empty. It wasn't. Inside, a single stone gleamed, ruby the size of her thumbnail, deep red, dark as blood. But it wasn't the color that froze her. It was what was trapped inside it. A thin fracture line ran through the gem's center, and within that crack, impossibly, was something that looked like a word, tiny, etched from the inside. She turned it under the flashlight beam, 3 letters. Sauce. Her knees nearly gave out. She stumbled backward, staring at the gem as though it might scream. "What did you do, Hale?" she whispered. "What were you trying to tell me?" The storm outside grew louder, wind hammering the metal like fists. In the flashes of lightning, the bus seemed alive again, breathing, trembling under the weight of the rain. Clara slipped the ruby into her pocket, clutching it tightly. She turned toward the door, desperate to escape the suffocating air inside. But when she stepped down onto the driveway, her breath stopped. At the end of the street, the black sedan was back. Its headlights flicked on, just one, like a signal. She backed slowly toward the house, the rain pounding harder. Her shoes slid on the wet gravel as she fumbled for her keys. The car didn't move, it only watched. When she finally got inside, she slammed the door, locking every bolt. The ruby burned warm in her hand, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. She stood there in the dark, trembling, the storm echoing through the walls. Outside, thunder rolled again, but this time beneath it, she swore she heard another sound, not from the sky, from the bus. A low hum, like an engine starting after years of silence, and in that instant, Clara knew the past wasn't finished. It was coming back, driving straight toward her, wearing the face of a man who disappeared 60 years ago. As lightning split the sky and rain blurred the windows, Clara realized she wasn't just uncovering a secret anymore, she was part of it, and somewhere within that storm, the ghosts of Santiago were finally awake. The storm had passed by dawn, but it left the world hollow, washed-out streets, branches scattered across yards, and a silence so sharp it hummed in the ears. Clara hadn't slept. She'd spent the entire night sitting on the couch, the ruby clenched in her fist, her eyes flicking every few seconds to the front window. The black sedan was gone, but its absence didn't bring relief, only the kind of quiet that feels like the pause before an explosion. By morning, her nerves were stretched thin. Ethan's footsteps echoed down the hallway, his backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. He stopped when he saw her, his brow furrowed. "Mom, what's going on? You look fine," she interrupted too quickly. "I'm fine. Go on, you'll miss the bus." He didn't move, his voice lowered. "It's not fine. You've been different. The way you look out the window every night, like you're waiting for something." Clara tried to steady her voice. "I just have a lot on my mind." He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed and walked out. When the door closed behind him, the silence pressed against her again, heavier this time. She stood slowly and crossed the living room, pulling the curtain aside. The driveway was empty. The bus sat under the weak morning light, streaks of dried rain tracing down its metal sides. It looked harmless again, mute, still, pretending to be ordinary, but she knew better. Something inside it wasn't just hidden. It was alive. She slipped her hand into her pocket, feeling the warmth of the ruby. It still pulsed faintly, like a heart remembering how to beat. She hated touching it, but couldn't bring herself to let it go. When she stepped outside, the air was thick with humidity and leftover electricity from the storm. The sky still carried that strange color storms leave behind, a bruised silver, neither day nor night. She opened the bus door. The hinge squealed softly, like a groan of protest. Inside, the scent of damp velvet and rust hit her instantly. Her flashlight swept across the floor. The footprints were back. Fresh, her pulse jumped. No, she whispered. Someone had been inside again. She backed away, her eyes darting to the seat where she'd left the ledger. Gone. Panic clawed its way up her throat. She scrambled through the compartments, searching. Nothing. The ledger, the manifest, everything was gone. Her breathing quickened, chest tightening. Whoever had broken in knew exactly what to take. She turned toward the door, and froze. The back window was shattered. Glass covered the floor like ice, glinting in the morning light. A cold gust blew through the broken pane, scattering scraps of velvet across the aisle. The ceiling panel hung open. Clara's hand shook as she lifted the flashlight toward it. The velvet pouches, some were gone, the rest ripped open, their contents spilled out across the seats. Tiny sparks of red and green shimmered amid the glass. Her legs gave out, and she dropped to her knees among the wreckage. No, no, no. The gems that remained were duller now, dusted in glass and mud, their light muted. She reached for one but froze when she heard it, a car door slamming shut outside. She turned her head sharply, heart hammering. Footsteps slow, purposeful. Someone was walking toward the bus. She crouched low, peering through the front window. A figure moved through the fog, broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes, a cap pulled low. He reached the bus door and gripped the handle. Clara's instincts screamed. She grabbed the flashlight, killed the beam, and slipped into the shadows at the back of the bus. The door creaked open. The man stepped inside. Every breath she took sounded too loud, too sharp. She could smell the faint trace of rain on his jacket, hear the scuff of his boots on the metal floor. He walked slowly, scanning the seats, his hand gloved, movements deliberate. A professional. Clara crouched behind one of the benches, her fingers gripping the cold edge of the seat. The ruby in her pocket burned against her thigh. The man muttered under his breath, "Where's the rest of it?" His voice was rough, accented. Eastern European maybe. He stopped inches from where she was hiding. She could see the edge of his coat, the faint glint of a gun at his side. Her pulse roared in her ears. He leaned down, his hand brushing the seat above her head. "Come out," he said softly. "No use hiding. We know what you took." Clara's breath caught. In one desperate movement, she grabbed a rusted wrench from the floor and swung it hard against the back door. The sound echoed through the metal cabin like an explosion. The man spun toward the noise, and Clara bolted. She burst from her hiding place, sprinting down the aisle, shoving past him. His hand caught her jacket for half a second, tearing the fabric, but she kept running. She dove out of the bus, hitting the wet ground hard. The mud splashed up her arms as she scrambled to her feet and ran toward the house. Behind her, the man shouted something in a language she didn't understand, but she didn't dare look back. She threw herself inside, slammed the door, locked it, and pressed her back against the wall, gasping for breath. For a moment, all she could hear was her own heartbeat and the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel outside. Then silence. Clara moved to the window, peering through the blinds. The man was gone. The bus door hung open, swaying in the wind, but her victory was hollow. The ledger, the manifest, most of the gems, they were gone. Only the ruby remained, burning like a live coal in her pocket. Her hands shook as she pulled it out. The light caught the fracture again, revealing the word inside SOS. She stared at it, whispering through trembling lips. "I'm trying, Hale. I'm trying to save you." Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance. Not from a storm this time, but from engines, multiple, cars. Headlights flickered at the end of the street, one after another, cutting through the fog. Clara's breath hitched. Oh God. She turned, grabbed her keys, and ran down the hall. "Ethan," she shouted, "get your things, we're leaving." His voice came from his room, confused and half asleep. "What, why, now?" she screamed. He stumbled out, "Why?" Died as she shoved him toward the door. "Mom, what's happening?" Clara's voice broke. "We don't have time, just move."